Hi everyone, my name is Matt, also known as UKAstroNut. In this video I'm going to try and explain something that's really confusing, and I don't really understand it very well before I start looking into it because it can just be a little bit confusing. But I'm going to try and explain the difference between asteroids, comets and meteoroids, and also meteors and meteorites, because it's a little bit confusing, and in fact they're not even that well defined, the differences between them. But I'm going to try and explain kind of the ideas that we have. So I have here my handy whiteboard as usual, and here I have three areas, one for asteroids, one for comets and one for meteoroids. So let's go through them in stages. So what is an asteroid? Well, an asteroid is between around a meter and a kilometer in size. Now they often have metal cores, so the sensors them are metal, and the rest of them are kind of made from rock and ice and things like this. They typically seem to be in belts or sort of clouds in our solar system. So at the centre here we have the Sun. As you can see, there's sort of a ring of dots around the Sun. Now this is actually in our solar system between Mars and Jupiter, and it's something called the asteroid belt. And there's thousands and thousands of meteors all going around in this belt, and they stay around in the same position. Further out we have here is sort of another kind of ring, which actually in reality is sort of a big sort of cloud that's outside Uranus and Neptune's orbit. There's something called the Kuiper belt, and beyond that there's also something called a theoretical sort of idea of another place where asteroids would be, which is called the Oort cloud. So in our solar system we have the asteroid belt, the Kuiper belt, and then the Oort cloud, and these are all big sort of collections and clouds of asteroids in our solar system. We also find them just generally scattered around our solar system, and we also find that here we have a planet here, and in front and behind the planet are asteroids, and these actually follow and go in front of the planet as it orbits around. And these are things called Trojans, and they're just sort of gravitationally held by gravitational forces to stay in these positions in front and behind the planet. If you heard of near-Earth objects, or NEOs, which are potentially sort of hazardous things that could collide with the Earth, these are also asteroids. So these are asteroids that are around the same distance from the Sun as the Earth, and so potentially they sort of cross over to where the Earth orbits around, and so we can actually, one of these could hit us, or we could actually bump into it. So this is what asteroids typically are. Now comets are slightly different. They're basically the same kind of idea. They're still made of sort of rock and ice, and they orbit around the Sun. They're often thought to have sort of, well, they often have more elongated orbits. So instead of going nice circle orbits around the Sun, they'll get very close to the Sun, but they'll get flung really far away, and they'll come back and close and very far away. And we think a lot of these actually form and originate in these outer belts here, the Kuiper belt and the Oort cloud, and they are actually sort of bumped or knocked into out of their orbits around here. They're knocked in towards the Sun. The difference between an asteroid and a comet, technically, is that a comet has something called a coma and a tail. So as the comet goes near the Sun actually melts the ice that the comet is made out of, and it sort of creates like a small sort of fog or haze and a sort of cloud of water and moisture that's around the comet, creating a kind of mini atmosphere. And it also creates a tail, so this is just sort of remnants of water and things that get sort of strewn behind the actual comet itself. And it always points away from the Sun. So it's not actually the direction the comet is travelling, it's actually the opposite direction from where the Sun is, because as the Sun, its light and its energy goes towards the comet, it sort of melts it, and then it leaves this trail going in the opposite direction from the Sun. So that's the difference between a comet and an asteroid. So a comet has this coma and this tail, this sort of atmosphere of water and rock and things like this around the outside, as the Sun actually melts the comet itself. Now, what are meteoroids? Well, meteoroids are just very small asteroids. They're, you know, very sort of particles and slightly bigger, very small objects, and they are throughout our solar system, as meteors are. But the main difference of the meteoroid is that its size is very small. Now we think these probably actually are formed when things like, well, the trail here of this comet, when it gets broken up by the Sun, it releases little fragments of rock and ice, and these little fragments of rock are actually meteoroids. It just forms these meteoroids. all things like asteroids can smash into each other, or planets can collide into each other, and they break off and leave all these little pieces of rock and dust and ice. And these are actually what meteoroids are. So they're sort of the remnants of collisions or things like this of other objects. But you might also have heard of a meteorite and a meteor. Now, these two things are related. So when a meteoroid enters our atmosphere, what will happen is it will hit our atmosphere, and then our atmosphere, because it's going so fast and it's smashing into our atmosphere, it will heat up very, very quickly. And this will cause it to start melting, to sort of burn up in our atmosphere. You might have heard a shooting star, which is a sort of streak of lights that go across the sky, something like that. And these are just meteoroids entering our atmosphere. And these are basically meteors as they hit our atmosphere, and they melt and they fizzle up and they burn up, and then they stop somewhere in our atmosphere. But a meteorite is the same thing, but it manages to get through the atmosphere and actually hits Earth. Now often these are just very, very small, they're just tiny little things, or they're broken up our atmosphere, so they shower down and scatter a lot of different sort of pieces of rock and ice and things like this. But that's the difference. So a meteoroid is a little piece of rock that's in space. A meteor hits our atmosphere and gets melted and broken up and destroyed in our atmosphere. And a meteorite is one that gets all the way through our atmosphere and hits the ground. So that's the difference between an asteroid, a comet, a meteoroid, a meteor and a meteorite. It's a little bit confusing, but basically the summation is that asteroids and comets are giant rock and ice and metal floating through space, but a comet is one that's a bit too close to the sun and is kind of being melted by the sun, and it leaves a sort of a trail and an atmosphere of water around it. And then a meteoroid is a small piece of rock that's in space, and when it gets through and hits our atmosphere and burns up an atmosphere, it's a meteor, and when it gets all the way through our atmosphere and hits the Earth, it's a meteorite. So I hope that clarified a little bit what all these things are. It can be a little bit confusing, but hopefully that's cleared up a little bit. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, leave comments, questions and everything, and I'll see you guys soon.